Okay, just final little setup here, and we'll get going. Got your camera ready. We're gonna launch right into things today. And welcome, everybody. Just making sure the audio is working. My name is Michael Markowsky, and I'm going to be showing you a little bit about how to use your camera for the next hour here. If this is the first time you've seen my face and the first time you've heard anything about these classes, this is class number 8 of 10, showing people how to use the very basics of their digital SLR or mirrorless camera. And some of the earlier classes are particularly helpful for people even if you're using your smartphone. Eventually I'm going to teach a class which I have taught before, but I'll do here online on how to use your smartphone from beginning to end. So that's a whole other thing. So stay tuned to that. If you're interested in finding out about that, please like the video and also subscribe. Hit the notification bell, and that will let you know when new videos are popping up on my channel. Okay, so today I think is a really exciting class because I want to show you I'm going to show you some photographs that I've taken, and I'm going to show you how to make those same photographs right here in the studio. So why don't we're going to do a quick little recap for about 5 minutes here, just showing people a little bit about how to find the manual controls and do it again. And I know it sounds repetitive, but I want, if you have your camera here, just practice along with me. Maybe your settings are they will be a little bit different because every situation has different light and different color of light and all that kind of stuff. But I think the more you're practicing with this, the more that you just start feeling like, oh, this is so obvious, it's so easy. That's the place you want to get to, because doing anything kind of above that, the next steps, becomes increasingly difficult the less familiar you are with your camera. Okay, so let's dive in here. You know what? Actually, before I even dive into that, I'm going to set up a small little still life, because previously I've had just the junk on my table here while I'm kind of, reconfiguring my studio. And I thought maybe why don't we try doing something just a little bit more pleasant so you're not looking at all of this junk here. So I'm going to show you a few things that I can use to transform this space. So maybe I'll just show you briefly. This is what this cluttered desktop looks like right now. And, it's a little bit, it's not pretty. Nothing that we particularly want to be taking photographs of, although I've been taking photographs of it for the past few weeks. So, let's see, I'm going to move this console out of the iPad that's doing all of the live switching out of the way. And then I'm going to grab a piece of foam core. So I'm going to use this, you can see on the iPhone here, this is totally blown out and overexposed, right? So this is, at the moment, it's going to be way too bright. But as you see, what we're going to do some low light images right off the bat. It's going to darken things, or it's going to work as a really nice background. So I'm going to clear space out of the way here and find a place where that can kind of lean back. Oh, okay. Again, it wants to keep falling on top of me. So I just tilt it back just like that. And I think, even here, we can see there's, it's blocking one light, but it's also bouncing light back onto my body right now. And you can kind of see a little bit of a glow happening right here. So even though, so what I've just done is just put this, this big board up on the table. Sorry. The reason why also that footage is a little bit herky-jerky is because the camera's in standby mode, right? So as it's, to kind of wake it up and to do another exposure reading, I just tapped the shutter release, and then that kind of makes the footage look a little bit more fluid again. So you can see this big backdrop now here on my table. So I'm going to put that down for a second. And then I'm going to grab my tripod, because I'm going to use my tripod for a lot of the things we do today. And I'm going to raise this tripod. So right now the legs, I'm able to show you, are fully extended, but I want to extend the top of this tripod. So some of them, what you would, there's kind of a little crank, and then you can move this up and up and down, however high you want it. I'm going to have just a kind of a chest level here, and I might adjust this again in a moment. Okay, now I was just about to put my camera on the tripod, and you know what? I just was thinking to myself, one of the things I tell people is don't put your camera in a tripod until you're ready to take photographs, because then you accidentally bump it and knock it over while you're moving things into position. So I'm going to hold off on a second to do that, and I'm going to grab the thing that I want to take photographs of, which are these flowers that I got for my wife for Mother's Day. And so now they're here on this counter. And I'm just, again, gonna move a few things out of the way to get this foam core to lay on the ground as evenly as possible. Okay, now, just as I'm looking at this, there's a kind of maybe a little bit of a dead flower right in the front, and its pieces are falling off. So these flowers, you know, Mother's Day was what, a week or more ago? So these flowers have gone through their natural cycle a bit here. So where can I move this flower? I'm just gonna throw this in the garbage. Okay. And I'm also just gonna quickly arrange the flowers just a little bit to make for a better composition. Now, I can't do too much right now because I can't see what the camera sees, but that kind of helps. Now I'm gonna put my camera up on the tripod here. And I'm going to switch to this view so you see what the camera sees. So, again, I'm just going to tap this, and so we see, so now right now I'm at my 18mm view, right? So with this lens, I'm all the way zoomed out, right? I could zoom in and I could zoom out, right? And there's a few things I could do. One of which I could tilt the camera down and I could see more of the camera. So I'm kind of looking, or more of the flowers in the vase. So now I'm kind of looking from above at these flowers. So I could do that. But you know, I think instead of tilting the camera down, what I'm going to do is move the whole tripod, or like instead of tilting the camera down, I'm going to move the tripod down so that instead of shooting at a down angle, I'm going to be kind of shooting straight on. And then I'm just going to back the camera off a bit here. And so you can see in this framing, there's kind of some stuff on the sides that, let me move back a bit, that I may not particularly want as part of my photograph, right? It's a little bit, there's all of this junk on this side and this side. Now, if you have software like, actually, I'm going to turn a little extra light on momentarily here. So if you have Photoshop, right, it wouldn't be too hard for me to extend the edges of this photograph to kind of make it look a little bit nicer. But you know what I'm going to do instead? I'm going to rotate the camera and put it into portrait mode. Okay. So now the camera is on its side, and I'll just kind of, so you can see here what that looks like, right? So camera is now on its side. And obviously I just want to make sure it's nice and clamped in and it's not going to fall out. And okay. So I'm going to take a photograph like this, and maybe, you know what, even before I do that, I'm going to zoom in a tad, so that kind of cleans up the top a bit. Because I want to get, I wonder if I can take this. Oh, that's interesting. So, what's a little disappointing about the view you're seeing momentarily is everything's on its side. That's a bummer. Okay, well, I don't know. I guess, you know what, since I could take a really kind of cool photograph like this, but since we're going to be, since we're trying to film this for a video, you don't want to be watching this whole thing on its side the whole time. That could be a little bit annoying. So I'm just going to darken this a little bit here. And you know what, I think we can probably, if I zoom in enough, again, I'm going to move this up. So this, it takes a little bit of time to kind of figure out what your composition is going to be. And I'm not really going to spend too much time sorting out this. I just want to do a quick demo. So I've got, let's just say, you know what, since I can't get the vase in here, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more. How can I find a really nice image? So this is part of being a photographer, is having to not only figure out what is in the picture, but what's not in the picture. So moving things around, taking photographs. So what I want to do is I'm going to take a photograph of the scene in front of me right now. And if you see this little white square kind of in the center, what that is this is the focus point. So I'm moving that up and down and around. And then I can also, depending on your camera, right now I did what's punching in, and I'm looking to see if things are in focus that are important to me. So everything looks pretty good. I'm at f3.6, which is a little bit narrow. So I'm actually going to open up maybe to f5. So I get a little bit more depth of field so that I don't have one flower in the front in focus, one flower in the back that's out of focus. I can make that happen, but maybe I'm going to... So let's say if this was a handheld shot, right, I'd want to be over, 1/50 of a second at least. So that means in order to kind of get an exposure that I could be happy with, again, handheld, I'm going to need to brighten the picture up. And so you see my exposure meter says I'm pretty good there. I'm just going to go down a little bit. Again, it's easier to brighten things up than it is to darken things. Okay, I'm not totally super happy with this composition, but let's just take a picture just to see what the results are. So again, if this was handheld, the picture would look like this. So let's take a look. And maybe I'm just gonna, this is the view, this is the picture as we see, and then I'm gonna just punch in a bit and see how well of a focus things are in here. Now, again, I'm pretending I'm hand holding this camera. So what you're looking at on the screen is a little bit of ISO, the high ISO. It's around 2000, which is not outrageous, but there is a little bit of that noise that we've talked about. So instead, let's now say we're on a tripod and we have all these lights on. So I can be slower than 50th of a second. I could go to, let's say, 15th of a second, and that would now allow me to drop my ISO down to, about 1,000 or less is going to be great. So let's say, look at this, 320. So let me take this exact same photograph again using these settings. And now before I do that, I'm also going to set my timer so that I've got a little bit of time for the camera, once I press the shutter release, for the camera to stop shaking. So let's take this same picture. So it counts down and then takes the photograph. So let's see what the results of this one are. Okay, so it actually looks darker than I was expecting, especially if we go back to the previous one. So, you know what, I'm just going to delete this, so I can have one that looks pretty similar. And like, look at that, you can see my exposure meter kind of going a little bit nuts, right? It's saying, it needs more light, it doesn't need more light. So let's try this. So, okay, so again, let's see. Okay, so now it's just a tad brighter than the previous one. But either way, this is, I like kind of this because I can brighten it up. And now, there's some parts that are going to be a little bit out of focus, to be expected. But everything is now much sharper. Okay, come on. Right, so there is some noise, very little bit of it though. Right, so what is out of focus and not blurry because of noise. So I'm just going to kind of back out a bit here. So already this is a much, sharper photograph than the previous one. Okay, so now let's say, so we have this great opportunity to use our tripod, and we're taking pictures of flowers which aren't doing much moving. So we don't need to be restricted to like a 15th of a second. In fact, we can turn off all the lights. So before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on, well, my focus, let's just keep the focus in the same place here. So you see it went green, and I was in autofocus. So I'll just do that again. So you can see this, I'm just gonna move it around, that little white cube right in the center, or square. I move it to a place that I want, and then I'm gonna press my shutter release halfway down. You see how it goes green? That means the camera, maybe in fact I'll even just put my hand in front of here so you could see a little bit more clear. So you see my hand, it's now focused on my hand. I take my hand off the camera, now the picture's out of focus because it took that the focus reading, set the autofocus to that length, that distance, and then it would be ready to take that photograph. So now I'm press it again. Once I've pressed it, now I can turn my camera to manual mode. Manual focus, my apologies. So I turn my autofocus to manual focus, and you can see now we've got some of the manual focus assist that just came up, that blue line outlining. That may or may not be something that's possible on your camera depending on the make and model and the price and all that kind of stuff. It tends to be kind of a little bit more expensive cameras have what's called a manual focused assist. So this just helps me, wherever it's kind of in blues, telling me that it's a nice sharp focus. So right now, I'm going to start turning a few of the lights off here. And we're going to get this room much darker. And so it's really important. See, you could probably barely see me in this. Well, I'm going to take a photograph like this. Now, if I took this photograph as we are right now, nothing would turn out, right? It's going to be way too dark. So I'm going to slow my shutter speed down. You see my exposure meter kind of climbing back up into a range there. And let's take this for us. This is now a 2-second long exposure. So let's see what the camera sees after 2 seconds. Okay. So that's, I mean, considering that you saw how dark the screen was a moment ago, right? It's a little bit too dark, but we have an image. So let's try this again. We're gonna brighten it up. And again, this is why the exposure meter is only so helpful, right? It's sort of telling us what it thinks is good, but I don't know if I agree 100%. So I'm gonna go up just a couple of, oops, did I go? Yeah, go up a little bit faster, or slower shutter speed, sorry. Okay. Oops, let's zoom in. This is the most recent photograph. And still a little bit. Oh. So, I do this in increments. I usually go I double things each time. So let's go up here. Now it looks much brighter. Okay. Now, again, this is where these flowers are is very, very dark. So this is amazing. This is a couple of, a 2-second long exposure, I think, here. And we can still see something on the screen. Oh, you know what? I just realized I was in, I think, am I using... no wonder it was kind of being a little bit funny. I think I was in a weird film simulation, as Fuji likes to call it. So I'm just going to take this photograph again. Okay. So if I want to brighten it up, I'm just going to do, let's just launch much higher up here. So now you see this, the camera's telling me that's too much. It's totally blown out. So now take this photograph. And let's see what this looks like. So, I mean, that's just, for me, I just think this is just incredible that we can be taking a photograph of something in the dark, and look how beautiful and lush, look at all the detail in here. Because we're also at a really low ISO number here. Right? If I tried to take this photograph before before focusing with the lights on, this would be a little bit of a trick, but I'll show you a hack for that in a moment. Now I'm going to turn all the lights off. Actually, here's another one I got. So it's going to get really dark in here. In fact, I'm going to keep the screen in the top left corner up so you can see just how dark it's about to get. Okay, so you can't even see me at all. I do have, there's a screensaver on my computer that's maybe providing a little bit of that colored light that you see happening. So let's brighten this all the way up here. Now, that's a 30-second long exposure, and that might be a little bit long for us. So let's just kind of brighten up the ISO. I'm going to put my aperture down a little bit. So right now the camera's saying, whoa, that's actually going to be a little bit bright. So let's try this. This is going to be a 10-second, I'm just actually going to, I'm going to log into my computer here real quickly. And I turn, at least, okay, so, it's still kind of bright. It's, okay, I'm just gonna put that to sleep, I think. Okay, so now, I wonder where that, what that green light is. I think that's actually from the iPad. Oh, it's coming. Anyway, there's some weird light, green light. That's what's kind of funny about these things, is where is the light coming from? So here's 15 seconds. So we're going to start this photograph right now. So it's counting down. It's taking this long exposure. You can still hear my voice, and I'm still here. And my hands are off the camera. I'm not touching anything. Because as soon as I press that shutter release, the button that takes the picture, I want to move away from the camera so that I'm not... Look at that. Whoa. Now I'm super intrigued. I gotta find out where that green light is being cast. How is it getting on here? Oh, that's so funny. So, okay, so that green light is being cast by, okay, let's try doing this again. And I'll just show you once the lights are on here. So me trying to describe this in the dark. So I'm actually going to need a little bit more. So we're going to do it. Okay, so let's try this. Let's see how well that works. So this is, I think, a 25-second long exposure. And, which is, you know, again, this room right now is essentially pitch black. Right? There's, what you see on the screen is what I'm seeing. Which is why becoming more and more familiar with your camera so you can make these adjustments in the dark is really, really helpful. Okay, so let's look at this picture. So this is the photograph that just came out. Actually, I'm going to switch this out because you can't even see me on the screen anyway, so let's get rid of that box. So this is the bizarre photograph that just resulted in a pitch black room. Right? No light in here. You know, if I was trying to walk around, I'd be bumping and stumbling into things and knocking things over. So look at the kind of detail we can get here. So obviously some places are darker than others. And you know what, let's just, I'm gonna do, okay, so this is gonna be, I'm gonna, just for the sake of things, I know, okay, so this is gonna be a 2-minute long exposure here. So it's gonna go for 2 minutes, and while that's happening, I'm going to get something, a little special thing that I'm going to use in a few minutes here. So I know if you're watching it, this is like watching paint dry, right? There's nothing much for you to see on the screen except this number counting down, so you can go make yourself a cup of tea. Or, you know, if you're watching this video in a few days after after it was broadcast, obviously you can just skip ahead until the video shows back up again. But this is, I'm going to show you after this one little technique that we can do while playing around in the dark with your camera, and then I'm going to show you some photographs I took just last night outside and inside our living room in totally dark environments, and you can kind of, I'll show you all the settings so you can see if you want to try to replicate those on your own later on. But it does take some patience and obviously time when you're doing this, because you want to take the picture and then to walk away, to do something else, so that you're not, you know, touching the camera, bumping into the tripod, or doing anything. So, you know, what I was doing last night is I just would set my tripod up, set the camera to take an exposure, and then just walk away, sit down, watch a YouTube video. You know, this is in the middle of the night, it's pitch black. So you want to think of, like, what can I bring with me that could occupy myself while my camera is taking these pictures. Okay, so that was 2 minutes long. Now let's take a look at this. Cool. Okay, now I keep zooming into that part that's slightly out of focus, because we are still with a fairly shallow depth of field, remember, right? So some things are going to, and I did that in order to speed up the process. Like, look at that. I'm in a totally dark room. It's pitch black in here. Like, I cannot see where I am without, you know, I'm just kind of standing a few inches away from the camera itself. And look how much just gorgeous detail we're getting out of a plant, right? I mean, it's just this. Okay, so let me try. I'm going to do this same thing again, and where can I move this camera? I'm going to point it. Okay, so you see, this is, that's on the other side of the room here. I was looking for something equally as dark. Actually, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn this light back on. Oh, just blew a bulb. Okay, let's turn this on. Okay, so I'm going to show you this little fun exercise I'm about to do here. So you can see all this. Well, it's kind of cluttered right now, obviously, but So it's all this stuff is flashing on the screen because it's saying, whoa, too bright, too bright, too bright. So I'm just going to darken things down a bit, and then I'm going to focus on something approximately where I'm going to be standing. Okay. And now I switched my camera to manual focus from autofocus, right? Because it was really, I don't want, if all the lights are off and I try to do this, I'm not going to be able to see anything. Everything's going to be out of focus. I'm going to turn that off. And I usually use, let me see, I have another old iPhone here somewhere. Okay, here it is. So, okay. So what I'm going to do is let me just turn. So I've now turned on the flashlight on my iPhone here. So just so you can see, I've got the flashlight on, and I'm going to turn off all the lights, and I'm going to try drawing in the dark. Okay, so let's turn off all the lights again. Oh, this one's on. Okay, so you see now it's pitch black in here, except for this here. So let's now expose for this dark environment. Oops. Don't want to be too dark. So the ISO is super sensitive, so let's take this about as low as it can go. And, well, actually, no, I'm going to keep it at I don't think most cameras can go, 200 ISO is going to be much more common. So, and I'm upping the aperture, so all of this is making the camera as insensitive as possible. And that allows me to slow my shutter speed down. So let's say here, I'm going to even make the aperture even less sensitive. Let's crank it all the way up to one end here. So I've got a now 10-second long exposure. So I'm going to press the shutter release, and then I'm going to jump in front of the camera here. And so let's see, how did that turn out? Oh, so it was a little bit high. So you see what I'm doing is I'm drawing in the frame. So I might need to stand back a little bit. Let's do this again. Oops. Okay, just bumped the camera in the dark. I'm telling you, it's dark in here. Okay. Okay, so let's see what resulted here. It's still a little bit off. So again, this takes a little bit of practice. Let's try doing that again. Oh, and I just realized, okay, so you see, there's the results. I was drawing a little bit of a heart, and I just realized the camera was all the way zoomed out, and so that's what made things a little bit difficult. So I'm going to try one more time now that the camera is zoomed out. 10-second long exposure. And let's see if we were able to spell something. I was trying to write hello. Okay, I'm gonna do that just one more time. And okay, I'm so close. I'm gonna just try once more. So every time I'm doing this, I'm realizing, you know, I'm getting my body into better position, and it's hard. Would be a little bit easier to do if you had somebody helping you. Okay, so. Okay. I think you get the point anyway, right? So I'm gonna bring this view back in here as I slowly pop some lights back on. Okay. So, turn my flashlight off on my little phone here. So, I'm just going to turn this. And before I'm going to take my own advice, take my camera off this tripod before I knock it onto the floor and break it. So what is kind of exciting about all of that is the different pictures. All of those pictures I took in a room that was pitch black, virtually impossible to see anything, and yet I created some really interesting images. And I just did that, it took me 20 minutes or so to do most of that work. And so it just gives you an idea of how if you play around with your camera, you're really going to get some things that are going to blow your mind. Like I found those ones that were, I think it was like 2-minute long exposure of these plants. That I think is the most exciting. Getting a picture of plants or a bowl of fruit or anything in a room that has no light looks like magic. Okay, so let's take a look at just a few photographs that I've sent here. Okay, so I'm just looking at a few comments people sent. I'm glad to see all these people in here who are taking a good advantage of the class so far. Okay, so what do I want to show you first here? Let's take a look at the photos that I took just last night here. I'm going to bring these ones up. And I was actually also took photos on my phone with the idea of, I was going to show you, like, this is what my phone can capture, and this is what my my mirrorless camera can capture. So you could actually see for yourself the difference. But the photos that I took on my phone, they were just pure black. So I could just throw a black screen up and you wouldn't know any difference whatsoever. So okay, so I'm getting everything into position here. And okay, So what we're looking at on the screen, I'm going to bring up the photo info here in a moment so you can kind of see how these pictures were taken. So this first photograph, again, this, well, let's say, okay, this I took at 3:37 in the morning last night, right? So it was dark, right? And there was no moon in the sky. So it's it wasn't particularly, well, it was a little bit cloudy, but I'm living here in Vancouver where there's lots of light pollution, so there's really no way for me to see stars. So I was like, well, I'm not going to even bother trying to take a photograph like that. I will show you a few star photos here in a moment, but I just want to show you that this is stuff that you could do. I just set my tripod up like on the balcony backyard to try to take some photographs. So this first photograph I took, this is 120 seconds, so 2-minute long exposure, right? f2.8 and ISO 200. So I'm going to get this, maybe just move that out of the way for right now. So you could see, this is the first one I took. And this takes, if you're going to take some really low light photos, just like the ones I was doing here, it takes some fiddling around, right? You're unlikely, excuse me, to get the picture you want right off the bat. So again, that's why have your phone, have a book on your phone. People bring podcasts or some music, something to listen to while the camera's taking photographs. And another thing I'll also mention, I don't know if this is, I'm trying to think if I had this problem with my Canon in the past, but I was taking these on the Fuji XT3, and there's an option in the settings for long exposure noise reduction. And what that does is it's supposed to kind of help reduce the noise in the ISO for a long exposure by essentially taking double the length of time. So I was taking some photographs for like 8 minutes long, and that ended up being a 16-minute long process because it would take the photograph and then sort of take another photograph of the pure darkness to try to, and then it kind of stitches them together. So it took this, it was so long waiting. So I turned that off, and I didn't really notice any significant difference, because then all of a sudden I turned that off, and I took an 8-minute long exposure, and then it ended and I could look at the picture instantly. So that also saved me time. But I learned that the hard way. I ended up, punching it into the search engine, like, why is my camera taking so long to process? Because it would take the photograph and then it's a little spinning wheel processing, and to the point where I'm starting to think maybe something's wrong, right? So, just like anybody, you watching here, there's a learning curve involved. Okay, so here, the first one I took. And when I was looking through the viewfinder after I took this picture, I felt like, this area up here was in reasonable sharpness, but everything down here was a little bit fuzzy, a little bit out of focus. And I didn't want that, right? I wanted, there to be a little bit more sharpness, more things in focus. And part of the problem was because, let's move this back into place here. It wasn't my ISO. My ISO was low, 200. Right? It wasn't my shutter speed, which was 120 seconds or 2 minutes. It was my F number. My F number 2.8. That meant the depth of field was relatively shallow. So if I was focused on something over here where there was the only light that I could see, that meant things in here in the foreground were going to be a little bit out of focus. So I didn't want that. So then I started kind of playing with my camera. So this is the next photograph I took. So this one here is 240 seconds, which is what, 4 minutes long, and f22. So I went all the way to the other side, and then ISO 800. Right, so I had to make it a little bit more sensitive. Otherwise, this would have had to been like 8 minutes long or so. Right. Now, I just want to show you a couple little differences. So this is the f2.8, the first image we were just looking at. Look at the lights here on the building across the alleyway. See how it's just sort of a big bright kind of ball of light, right? It kind of just fades out, right? Whereas look at on f22, we see this kind of star pattern. And this is what happens when you go up into like a high f number, aperture number, is that we get this kind of star pattern. So the higher the number, the more kind of points on the stars that you're going to see. So I liked this, but of course now the background, or the foreground really, is not out of focus, but too dark. So then I started playing around here and I did another photograph to get more light in here. So this is 240 seconds, 4 minutes long, f22, but now I raised my ISO from 800 to 2000. So the only difference here is the ISO. So the ISO is way more sensitive. Now, at this point, this is like almost 4 o'clock in the morning, so I'm getting a little cold standing outside, so I thought, okay, I could take another one that is like longer, 8 minutes. And again, I was using, I had the long exposure noise reduction, so the photos, it wasn't just 4 minutes long, it's an 8-minute long photograph for this to process. And I was just kind of like, I gotta call it quits, right? I thought I was gonna go out there, take a couple quick photographs and be done. And here I'm standing outside on the balcony for, half an hour. Now so then I moved my camera inside, and this is our kitchen, and this is our chaos, things kind of piled all over the place. Our daughter's little chair she sits in when we're cooking in there, and she can watch us. All the clutter on the shelves and everything, right? It's not a composed photograph. I just want to kind of show you, also to maybe slightly inspire you to think about, like, I don't need to arrange the perfect composition before I can start taking photographs, right? So this is the first image that I took here, and my exposure time 480 seconds, which is, I don't know how, I'm not a mathematician by any means, so whatever. All right, here I got a calculator here. Oh, and I just closed it. So what we say, 480 divided by 60 is 8 minutes. So this is an 8-minute long exposure. And so what I did here is I literally turned the camera and pointed it at, and this is pitch black in here. There was a little tiny, very small nightlight that was kind of by the toaster oven that is just there so that people don't fall over things in the middle of the night. But it's dark, right? It's because we want our whole house to be as dark as possible so our 9-month-old daughter can fall asleep. So then we have a really, really dark environment. So that's why this is what's exciting is this. I took this again on my iPhone, and it was totally dark. Like, I tried to brighten it up and everything. You could not see anything. So that's exciting. So again, this is 8 minutes long, f22, ISO 2000. And I thought, okay, let's take one more here before we go to bed. Oh, sorry. But it does get a little addictive. So this one is 240 seconds, 4 minutes long, f8. So that I'm letting in like 5 times more light into the camera by just lowering this aperture number. All right, so a lot more light coming in, and ISO 800. So you see here, this is the previous one, ISO 2000. And I think the reason why I lowered the ISO number is I wanted a little bit more sharpness in the image. Because let's just zoom in. You can see all the things on our shelves, suntan lotion and cookbooks and all that kind of stuff, right? So I wanted more sharpness versus, I think, this one. You can see that noise in the picture, right? It looks when I'm zoomed out, maybe not such a problem, but when I zoom in, it starts to fall apart. So I was kind of like, I want to correct that. So here again, we're nice, look at the difference when we're zoomed in. Can't quite read all of the things on here. If I went to an even lower ISO number, if I went down to my lowest ISO number, to like, my camera could go to 80, but if I went down to, 200, the camera would be far less sensitive, but far sharper. But that would mean that instead of a 4-minute long exposure, I'd probably be thinking more 15 minutes long. So instead of 4 minutes, 15 or longer, right? And I'm like, at this point, it's 4:30 in the morning, right? But then I kind of get the bug, right? So I'm like, I'm kind of up and I'm energized. I love how this looks. So here I go into the living room, and this was even darker. We've got blackout blinds here in this room, pitch black, no joke. Again, I took this on my iPhone. It's totally dark. You cannot see anything. And so this photo is 120, so only 2-minute long exposure, f2.8. So this is having this low aperture number, right? F2.8 allowed me to speed up the photo, right? And then ISO 1000. And here's the photo. It was, in fact, so shocking that I had to, afterwards, there's a few things I still don't even know. I don't know what this, I don't know if this is on the back of our TV or where this it could have been a car that passed by during the time I was taking a picture and shined some red lights onto it. This is just a little bit of light squeaking through the side of the curtain. And this is a lamp, street lamp, coming through the small window above our door, right? So this, if I showed this to, if you, without knowing any of that, you might think, well, this is taken on, let's say, this maybe is just around sunset. This is the sun setting out the window in the hallway. But this is, 4:30 in the morning last night, right? And then I'm like, oh, this is so exciting, because I think it's so exciting to see this kind of stuff appear before your eyes in the total darkness. So here I turn the camera to point at the kitchen table, and you see these flowers I was just taking photographs of earlier on in today's class. And I did the same thing here. So we have our 2-minute long exposure, 120 seconds, f2.8, aperture 2.8, ISO 1000. And I took this picture and I thought, okay, it's okay, but it's still a little bit dark. So I took one more. I think this is the last photo. So again, this is 4:46 in the morning in a room that's pitch black with blackout curtains. You cannot see anything in this room. I have the tripod up and I'm being very careful. In fact, just so you know, what I was doing is I had my phone, I turned the flashlight on my phone. So most smartphones can do this, right? Just like I was doing earlier. I turned the flashlight on, and in order to focus this, because this is almost 5 in the morning, I didn't want to turn all the lights on to focus my camera and wake up my whole family. What I did is I would just kind of have a little bit of light shining onto the table and trying to kind of shine it on an edge, like this envelope or this, I think this is a candle holder, right? So because the camera usually focuses really well on sharp edges. So I'm pointing it at that in the dark room, using the manual focus of my camera with that focus peaking, that blue outline, and that would help me see these edges, right? And then I just cover the flashlight back up again, right? And then I took the picture, right? So this here is 2 minutes long, 120 seconds, f2.8 aperture, ISO 1000. I was trying, what was the difference between, and I don't know what I did differently, to be honest. The settings look identical. I thought I changed something, but I'm just going back and forth, and you see all the numbers are the same. I honestly have no idea why it's a little bit brighter. I think it's probably just, if anything, you know what this might be is the residual light from my phone, because I'm standing next to the tripod, you know, just looking on the web, you know, looking up camera gear probably. And so just that little bit of light that's coming off of my phone is bouncing around the walls and ceiling and illuminating this picture, right? So that goes to show you how when you have a longer exposure, all that light is slowly bouncing around the room and making its way through the lens onto the camera sensor. So this is really interesting. That kind of blows my mind that just this little device was illuminating things so much. Okay, so I just want to finish now talking a little bit about astrophotography. I know that was the topic for today's class. Well, actually, there's so many things I want to talk about. Well, maybe I'll talk about this stuff next class, and then we'll go right to the star photography. So, star photography is super exciting and super challenging. If you haven't kind of gathered from everything we've been talking about so far, you see that when we're working in these extreme low light situations, you have to be patient and you have to accept that things are just going to need a little bit of extra time to kind of fumble around and get your exposure set and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just moving this up here because I can try to condense the screen as small as, okay, is that the smallest it'll go? So you can see my exposure time is on this photo is 15 seconds. Maybe I'll just leave it up here for most. I'll put it right in the middle so you can kind of see. So 15-second long exposure, f1.6, and then ISO 1600. So these are the main three things for you to. I wonder if I can highlight. Well, maybe I'll just leave that. We'll see how this works. So this is, I took a bunch of photographs earlier, I guess it was about a year ago now. When were we there? Last June up in Haida Gwaii, which is formerly known as the Queen Charlotte Islands in northwestern British Columbia, kind of halfway between Vancouver and Alaska. And a beautiful, I mean, I think when everything returns back to normal, everybody should go visit it. It's one of the most beautiful places on the earth. Okay, so I just took my camera out, and I would have been on a tripod, obviously, for 15-second long exposure. So I just take a photograph right off the bat. What is my results? What do I get? And let's take a look. So again, 15 seconds. The previous one, was 15 seconds as well, but you can see the main thing, I reduced my ISO down. And then I'm starting to play with exposures here. So now I'm making this, the ISO goes all the way down to 160. And I wanted to see the difference. So this one, here's f2 versus f3.2. Now, when you're taking photographs of stars, ideally you want to have what we would call a prime lens, and you want kind of a wide angle lens. So I think all the photographs I took in this batch of photographs was with the 16mm lens. So this lens, and so this is, if I look at my camera here, on this camera I have my zoom lens, my kit zoom lens, which is 18 to 55, right? 18 to 55 millimeters, right? And so I can zoom in and out. This lens is only 16 millimeters, so it's all the way zoomed out, and it doesn't zoom in or out at all. So I get this kind of big wide angle view, which is perfect for landscapes and for star photography. You generally want a wide angle lens so we see lots of stars. But the other thing that a wide angle lens allows us to do is have a longer exposure time, where I can see more. If you want to do like light trails, you want to be on a long or a wide angle lens. And I'll show you the numbers here in a second for people who are really into the kind of science and the technical stuff about this. I'll show you that in a moment. But I imagine most people watching this either aren't interested in all that information, and I don't want to confuse people too much. You can do star photography with your camera. What I would just do, if you have a kit lens, like a lens that zooms in or out, is I would just zoom it all the way out so you can see lots of things, right? Because that's going to allow you to take the longest exposure. Now, okay, so I'm just going to, I'll connect the dots here in a moment. So maybe, so first I started these pictures you see here with the trees in the bottom. Now I know some people would say maybe that's distracting. I don't want to see all those trees, but for me, I always want a little bit of a context, right? If I just, and I think I do point the camera at some point just away from the, I point the camera straight into the sky at some point, but then it's just sort of, it's like, I don't know enough about the stars to look at a photograph of just a bunch of random stars and have some idea of where I'm pointing to. So, yeah, I'm moving the camera around. And the other thing, what I'm also using here, and I don't know if I can, I wonder, actually, yeah, you know what, I'm going to take this camera out since I'm not using my overhead camera. So this is my No. Okay, check. It looks like we probably lost sound for the last 10 minutes or so, right? Okay, I'm just gonna look at lost. Okay, I'm not sure where we were here now that we've got sound back. My apologies. How long ago, where was I when I took that camera down? Oh man. What was the last thing that I was talking about before the sound went out? I think I was talking about the stars, so I don't think I'm too far back. Maybe I'll just kind of talk about this photograph again. So the info you're seeing here, exposure time 13 seconds, f2, ISO 640. So what appears to be the sun setting over the horizon like this is not the sun setting over the horizon. In fact, this was taken at 1:34 a.m. So the sun set, I think, somewhere around like 8 or 9 o'clock. So about 4 to 5 hours after sunset, after the sun had completely disappeared behind the horizon, and this is now totally dark. Like, I did not see any of these colors whatsoever. After that had happened, but I took this longer exposure. It's only 13 seconds, which is not, in the grand scheme of things, too long, but this is the residual light of the sun bouncing off the atmosphere from the other side of the Earth, creeping back into view. So this is, again, something that my eyes are incapable of seeing, and yet it's illuminating part of the sky right down here. And that also allows us to have this like ink black sky with some of the stars appearing in the picture. This is the original photo that you saw in the thumbnail to this video. I did kind of edit that photo just to kind of brighten the stars up a little bit, which is, again, a reminder, virtually every photograph you see these days has been edited in some way. The other thing that I should mention, and this was probably cut out from the when I turned the microphone off accidentally. One of the little things that I use on my phone is there's a few different apps. I think it's called Night Sky, and there's a few other ones that I've used. I'll put them in the links to the description below, that allow you to kind of hold your camera up, and it uses kind of like a virtual imposition over the sky. So you point your camera up in the stars, and it'll tell you what stars you're looking at, right? So I would use this to point at different things, different stars that I saw that were really bright, and then it would say, oh, that's not a star, that's Mars, or that's Jupiter, Saturn, right? Or, you know, all the different planets. And it would also tell me if there was a satellite passing through here, or Hubble telescope, that kind of stuff. And so that was really helpful, so that I can kind of orient the camera towards to face something. So for instance, these are light trails. I think I talked about that, but I'm going to go back. So in this photograph, I'm looking at the Milky Way here, kind of crossing through the middle of the sky, and that is virtually invisible to the eye. You can kind of see it in this environment way up in the Pacific Northwest. There's very little light pollution, so you have a nice clear sky, but still it's kind of hard to see. So using that app, you can kind of point it down, and it'll show like, okay, this kind of cluster of things is the Milky Way. So I kind of pan, okay, now that helps me decide where I want to orient my camera so that I can get that picture. This little streak here, this would be like a satellite or maybe a shooting star coming into the atmosphere. So this is a 10-second long exposure, f2, ISO 2500. So brightening up having a higher ISO allows it to be a little bit brighter, but I'm going to sacrifice some detail and have a little bit of noise in the picture. Like you can see how kind of noisy this picture is, as opposed to, oh, it's kind of dark. Let's go to another one. So this one here is 6400. We're looking at, I mean, I'm now zoomed way in, but it's, you can see even here much clearer. Okay. And this also just tells you the lens that I was using, the 16mm f1.4. Okay. Oh, I did mention I attempted a little bit of some star trail photography. So star trails are where you're taking photographs of the stars and you have a longer exposure. So here's 2 minutes and 40 seconds, f2 ISO 200. And what's happening is the stars are crossing, or they're moving through the sky here. And which is really exciting. You get this kind of blur, like right up here, this looks like some camera shake, but you can see down here the trees are kind of sharp in this big rock. All of this is in sharp focus, so all this movement is just happening by the Earth rotating, right? Now, this photo is taken at 1:30 in the morning, so it's dark and it's cold, and I'm sitting literally within like arm's reach of the shore in just south of Alaska, so it's cold even though it's summer. So I was not really interested in hanging around in this environment and taking like 10-20 minute long exposures in the dark. And it's also kind of a little bit creepy. You hear, it's so dark and you hear a twig snapping behind you and you think like, I'm in a really isolated place. There's probably some bears and cougars and stuff wandering around here. I didn't tell my wife that, but it's a little sketchy to be out there by yourself. So I didn't really want to spend too long with these really long exposures. But if you're in a nice dark place where there's very little noise pollution, you could set your camera up on a tripod. You could have a long exposure. You'd want to be doing something, let's say, you got to think about how, like this is a 240, that's a 4 minute long exposure. And look how little the stars moved, right? So you could just sort of, if this star here, that's 8 minutes. That's, let's say 16 minutes. That would be 30 minutes, right? So to get this star to move this far in the sky would be about a 30 minute long exposure. So think about that. You're sitting next to your camera on the tripod for 30 minutes. So to do an exposure that long, what I would do is my ISO would be at its very, very lowest. Maybe, if you can get down to 80, some cameras, the lowest is like 160 or 200. And then my F number would have to be all the way up at its highest, like 22 or 32 if you can get it that high. And then that would account for, because I have such a long exposure that too long is going to be too bright. So you can see in this situation here, a little bit brighter, 800, and you can see this is getting too bright, right? So I'm going to show you just a little bit of technical info. I think I had a little website over here. Oh, no. So what I want to show you, I think it's this, I find. So I was looking for this chart right here. So, so you can't see that. I'm just going to move this into view on the screen. So the reason why I'm showing you this is that when you're taking photographs of the stars, there's this thing called the 500 rule. The 500 rule, it helps you determine how long your shutter speed should be if you want to take photographs of the stars and have the stars nice and sharp. Like, you're not looking for the light trails that we were just talking about, but you want to be able to see the, you know, a star as a point rather than as a kind of an arc in the sky. So this here is going to, so you want to look at your focal length on your camera. So if your focal, your length is, you're all the way zoomed out, which is what I would suggest you do. So if you have a camera that's like 18 to 55, I would go to your 18 millimeter, which isn't on here, but it'll be, you know, it's obviously in between here. You know, if you're zooming in, then you're going up to 200 if you have one, but I would try to use, if you have a 16 millimeter lens that's dedicated, like this one, pure, does not zoom, this would be great. That would be probably one of the best lenses you could use. So the next thing, how do I explain this in like as short of span as possible, is to what kind of camera do you have? Do you have what's called a full frame camera or a cropped sensor camera, or as it's known as an APS-C camera? So it's, a full frame camera are usually more expensive and larger cameras. So like a Sony A7 III would be a full frame camera. A Nikon Z6 or a Canon R or Canon RP, those are full frame cameras. Most lesser expensive cameras are what's known as APS-C cameras. So they have a slightly smaller sensor. And I don't want to get into all the details of this, but so these two cameras that I have in my hands here, this is the Nikon D3100 and the Canon T5i. Those are APS-C or cropped sensor cameras. And it sounds, cropped sensor kind of sounds bad, but this is my Fuji. This is a beautiful $2,000 camera that is, I use it for professional work. And this is also a so-called crop sensor APS-C camera. So the difference is that if you had a full frame camera, then your times are gonna be just a little bit different. So if I had a 16 millimeter lens on a full frame camera, I could do a 31-second long exposure with that camera. So a 31-second long shutter speed, right? And I could get nice sharp details in the sky. If, however, I was using like the other APS-C cameras, crop sensor cameras I talked about, it's going to be slightly, I'm going to have to go to a faster shutter speed just because of the physics of the way the light gets to the sensor. So you can see all of these here would be somewhere between 20 to 21 seconds long. If you have your 18 millimeter lens, for most people watching this video, in other words, long story short, if you have an 18 to 55 millimeter lens, you would, and you have a crop sensor camera, which is probably most of you, you're talking somewhere in between around 18 seconds, 17 and a half seconds long shutter speed. Seconds, not 1/18 of a second, but 18 seconds. And that's going to allow you, if your camera's on a tripod, to get, you know, sharp details in the sky and no light trails. Okay, so that's why I'm showing you this. I also, you know, when I'm doing any kind of thing like this, and I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger, is I make like a big list for myself to kind of help sort out any. So this, just for my own records, I put this as a little note in my phone, and then I can go, okay, so with this lens, this is about how long I can be at that aperture number. So again, this is probably going a little bit further than most people are interested in and learning. The long story short, if you, put your camera to its widest focal length, 18 millimeters, and you have somewhere between like 16 to 20 seconds long shutter speed is going to get you some nice sharp details. Now, you noticed in the photos I took, I was going a little bit faster. It was also because I'm sitting there, it's kind of cold, and I'm trying to experiment, and I don't want to spend too long with these long exposures and then not get the photograph I wanted. So I was in a bit of a hurry there, but I still took photos I'm really happy with. So I think that describes that. Okay, so I think for here, that, is there anything else I wanted to mention here? I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it a class right now, and I'm going to look and see if there's anybody sent any photos that they want me to talk about or give you feedback on. So just for next week's class, what I would encourage you to do is just practice taking photographs at long shutter speeds. So taking photographs of flowers in your kitchen with all the lights off. You know, you want to start with turn all the lights on, focus your camera in autofocus or manual focus, whatever you like. But if you go into autofocus, it might be a little easier. Focus on what you want. You can even take the picture as you like it, so you can have something to compare with all the lights on. Focus it, then turn your camera to manual focus so that it's not going to try to hunt and find the right focus in the dark, because it's not going to be able to do that. When it's too dark, the camera can't focus. So then turn all the lights off, adjust your settings. All right, you're going to be somewhere around, like, let's say if it was as dark as our house was, 4 to 8 minutes long, right? And see what those photographs turn out, right? It's not going to work instantly. You're going to have, I've been doing this for years, and it took me like a good 5-10 minutes to get everything set up and to take that photograph. So you're thinking it's going to take, you know, somewhere between half an hour to an hour to start getting photographs that you're really happy with, right? So this is a process, right? But just like you saw, it can be super rewarding when things start working out your way. So the next thing is you can play with a flashlight or sparklers. So, I mean, if you do a quick kind of search, in fact, maybe I'm just going to take a quick second here to bring up, if I can find something online here. So I'm just going to take like long exposure sparkler photography, right? So like here's all of these different images. This is people playing around with their, you know, phone or flashlight or a sparkler. This is how you get this kind of a look when at long exposure. So you could, this is a super fun thing to do if you've got like kids, or like if you're a musician in a band and you want to get some really unique photos of you and your family. Like here's, like, you know, we have July 1st in Canada Day here in Canada on July 1st and July 4th in the States coming up. So you could get some friends together, assuming that you were able to, and take photographs like this, where every single person in the row is drawing one letter over and over and over again. All right. You can use like a flashlight. I had one. Oh, here it is. Right. If you took this flashlight, and this is a UV flashlight, right? And I could just do this. I'm going to get a nice kind of ring, something like this image here in the top right corner. So, and if you spend some time, just like I Googled long exposure sparkler photography videos. I'm sure there's dozens of people showing how all this is done. Like people did this on a car even, Okay, so practice, try doing that, involve a family member. You don't have to do this in the middle of the night. You know, I know not everybody is able to, you know, go out at 4 in the morning and start taking photographs, but you could involve your family in the afternoon in a room when you just close the blinds and get it reasonably dark, and you can do this exact same thing. And then also trying to find like long exposure photos on the web. Start kind of looking for them. And when you start looking for them, you're going to start seeing them everywhere. These, you can also do, we haven't talked about it, but it is possible to do long exposure images in the middle of the day. In fact, I just want to, as just a quick little history lesson, see if I could find, okay. I'm just bringing up this, some of the very first photographs of all time were taken through Windows. Oh, where does it go? Okay, so here's one of the first photographs taken of all time. Louis Daguerre, and he created a photographic process called the daguerreotype. But this is a photograph taken in the middle of the day through his window out onto the street. This is literally one of the, like, one or two very first photographs. This is the first one, and this is the second one. And this is a really busy street in Paris where people and, you know, carts of with vegetables and people being pulled around by horses, riding horses, and policemen and people with their umbrellas are walking by. But let me see if I can make this even bigger. What is, I think, really incredible about this image, and as many people have pointed out, is the only thing that is not, and the reason why we cannot see all that stuff that's moving around is because this is a long exposure photograph. I don't know off the top of my head how long this photo took to capture, but it was something, let's say, 5 minutes long, right? And so all the other people are walking around through here are just disappear. They're like ghosts because they're not staying still enough to be captured, except this one fellow here getting his shoe shined, right? So right on the bottom, this one person is standing still long enough for somebody to shine their shoes, and that's why he appears in this photograph. Everybody else is moving too quickly and they just become blurred. So you can do long exposure photographs in the middle of the day. If you wanted to do that, you want an ND filter. I'll just type or polarize. Some of them, they come together. This, so something like this, and you could just type in the you know, let's say you have a Canon T5. Actually, it would be different. So this is my old Canon camera. So if you wanted to put a filter on your camera, you would want to look at the front of your lens. And do I have this back here? It's not gonna. So I would look on the front of my lens, and you want to look for this, like a number. I don't know if you can even see that. So that says 58 millimeters, right? So that means if I want to put any kind of a filter on my camera, I need a 58 millimeter ring that's gonna for that filter. So I would just, instead, what I would look up is, let's say, ND filter. I can bring this back down. And the reason why I would want to put a filter like this on my camera, and there's different places you could buy it from. we're talking like $50. Some of them are going to be more expensive. Here's $40. The reason why you'd put a filter like that on your camera is that it's going to cut a lot of the light out. So it's going to make the picture much darker, which is going to allow you to take a longer exposure photograph in the middle of the day. So that's how you could get a really cool photograph. You set your tripod up in a very busy part of a town, let's say in the middle of Times Square, New York, right? And you could take, let's say, a 20-second long exposure with people milling all around. And just like that photograph we looked at moments ago of the people in Paris that aren't visible, you could take a photograph in a super busy intersection, and it would look like all of a sudden an abandoned street, right? Like in The Walking Dead or something. Okay, so I think that covers everything for our class. I'm not sure if anybody sent any more photos. Benjamin said he's going to send some long exposure stuff for next week. I'd look forward to seeing that. That'd be great. People saying the sound. Star shots in... Okay, yeah. So... Okay, so... I think we're going to call it a class there for today. We're almost 2 hours in there, and there was, 20 minutes or so where we didn't have any sound, so I appreciate you sticking around. If even though it wasn't working for a short period of time, and thanks for also letting me know that it wasn't working so that I could help get back on track. So all of your comments and feedback are super helpful. If you found anything in today's show helpful, please like using the like button below, subscribe, hit the bell so you'll know when the next week's video is popping up. And if you're feeling generous and you want to support the channel, you can do me a huge favor by contributing a small amount via PayPal, and follow the links down in the description below. Okay, everybody. I hope you guys have yourselves a wonderful rest of your afternoon or evening right here. I know sometimes people are watching from all over the globe, so maybe it's morning for you. Maybe the sun is on the other side of the earth. Take care, everybody, and we will see you next week.